Auguste Comte, widely regarded as the father of sociology, once proclaimed that demography is destiny. Well, demography may not be destiny, but population matters. Indeed, population trends have played and continue to play a critical role in the shaping of human destiny. Scientists believe that modern humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, evolved and were born about 250,000 years ago in Africa's Great Rift Valley. And it was there for most of our existence that we raised our children. We survived as hunters and gatherers. We lived in small kinship groups of about 100 or 200 people. And when a kinship group grew too large or food too scarce, the group would splinter and one group would go off in search of new food. This is where we started. But as a result of the process of division and migration, about 70,000 years ago, the first modern humans left Africa. And they departed for Asia and Europe. And when they arrived in Asia and Europe, they found themselves in competition with our distant human relatives, the Neanderthals in Europe and Homo erectus in Asia. But humanity was on the move. 50,000 years ago, the first modern humans arrived in Australia. 15,000 years ago, the first humans crossed over into North America. And in a matter of just a couple thousand years, they reached the southernmost point of South America. In evolutionary terms, we were the fittest of the fit, the rock stars of the Stone Ages. We could traverse deserts. We could climb mountains. We could ford rivers. There was no stopping us. 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, we were a global presence. And if we could go back in time to that period, 12,000 years ago, and travel around the Earth, say at an altitude of 10,000, 20,000 feet, you would find no traces of humanity. Because we were still living in those small kinship groups. We were still hunters and gatherers. And there were no pyramids, no cities, no great monuments. We were just simply there living in harmony with nature. But in many parts of the world at that time, there was not enough food. Now, necessity is the mother of invention. And we, hungry Homo sapiens, came up with the mother of all inventions, agriculture. This is what the world looked like before the Neolithic Revolution. Pristine and clean. But then everything changed with the Neolithic Revolution. The most important change was that we could accumulate for the first time in our history large food surpluses. And those small kinship groups could not protect the food surpluses and the farms. So kinship groups gave way to fortified cities. And these fortified cities changed everything, including the fact when they became in competition for resources. It led to organized warfare and armies. But this same competition between these fortified cities and city-states led to a revolution, really, in how we did it. Right here in the Fertile Crescent, between the Nile and the Tigris rivers, the first great civilizations arose as a result of the farming and our ability to produce food. Fortified cities led to these great civilizations. The civilizations were from Samaria to Egypt to India to China and beyond. But these early civilizations fell, population still grew, and new civilizations arose, including the ancient classical Greeks. They found that the stony soil of the Greek Isles and the Peloponnesian Peninsula did not produce enough food for an expanding population. So they set sail looking for fertile lands. And they settled in North Africa, in Sicily, and in the Italian peninsula. And population continued to grow. By the 1st century AD, at the time of the Roman Empire, world population, this is the ancient city of Rome, world population had risen to 300 million. Remember, we were at 5 million, now we're at 300 million. And population continued to grow because agriculture continued to expand. And by 1800, we reached a landmark in two respects. First, population reached, for the first time, the 1 billion mark. And it came at a time of the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution, like the agricultural or Neolithic Revolution, was transformative. It raised substantially standards of living in the world. But it also dramatically increased our impact on the planet. By 1900, the population was 1.6 billion. And thanks to advances in medicine, in nutrition, and in agriculture, population by 1999 rose to 6 billion. So population in the 20th century nearly quadrupled. But during that time period, fertility rates actually worldwide dropped, slowly at first. But then it picked up critical momentum with the introduction of the pill. In 1950, women had on average 5 children. Today, they have on average 2.5 children. But despite the decline in fertility, population is still rising. And the reason why is there's a very large, the largest generation ever of young people entering their prime reproductive years. So population is still growing. 5 years ago, world population reached 7 billion. And next year, it reaches 7.5 billion. And if fertility rates were to remain constant, world population by the end of this century could be 27 billion. But fertility rates will continue to decline. Demographers currently project that world population will reach 10 billion by mid-century, and that by the end of the century, we'll top out at 11 billion. The last 100 years has been what we call the demographic transition, historic and unprecedented. We moved from high fertility and high mortality down to low fertility and low mortality. But that transition has not been uniform. There is today what demographers call a demographic divide in the world between countries that have moved to low fertility and countries that remain at high fertility. But what does this mean for our human destiny? What does it mean for us? Well, let's start looking at Europe, North America, East Asia, and those parts of the world, other parts of the world, where women on average today have 2 children or less. Well, the first thing that should come to mind is it's good for the planet. Fewer people consuming fewer resources means fewer carbon emissions. That's important. It also means less environmental degradation. And it means that there's less pressure on our shrinking ecological assets, our forests, our wetlands, our coral reefs, our lakes, our rivers, our glaciers. And that's a good thing. But in addition to that, and this may surprise you, the population, stabilization, and decline that we see going on in the developed and emerging economies is a good thing. Yes, there are challenges to be sure to be associated with an aging population, Social Security and Medicare, for example. But economists also tell us that there is a silver lining here. And the silver lining is this, that as population declines or stabilizes, we get a shrinking labor force. And a shrinking labor force will actually help to boost real wages, because in a tight labor market, that's what happened. Real wages rise. And that will help to reduce economic inequality in the world, certainly in the advanced and developing economies. And there's another reason why it's important. And that is that it will help to keep unemployment rates low. And think about it, a tight labor market. Experts warn that about half the jobs in the United States today could be, in the near future, eliminated by automation, including automated cars. But what about the other side of that demographic divide, where fertility rates are still high? Population growth is a challenge multiplier. In the last 20 years, the world has seen some very significant progress in reducing severe poverty, and less so with respect to hunger. But even there, we've made some progress. But the vast majority of that progress has occurred in countries with low fertility. In countries with high fertility, progress has been elusive. Let me give you an example. Niger. Niger is a country in West Africa. It happens to be one of the very poorest countries in the world, and is also an arid country and subject to severe drought and heavily dependent upon external food aid for its survival. Here's the demographic challenge. Women in Niger today have on average 6 to 7 children. That's what's been done for centuries. But today, children in Niger, thankfully, now live to adulthood for the most part. Child mortality has been reduced. Well, here's what happens demographically. In 1951, the year that I was born, the population of Niger was 2.5 million. Today, it's 20 million. And by mid-century, in 34 years, it will be 70 million. And demographers project, even with declining fertility rates, that by the end of this century, Niger will have 200 million people. Unless fertility rates drop faster than anticipated, we will never win the fight against hunger and poverty in Niger. And Niger is not alone. There are many other countries: Somalia, South Sudan, Afghanistan, Yemen, Democratic Republic of Congo. It's a long list. But here is the important thing to remember. If in these countries girls receive the same education as boys, if child marriage practices are eliminated, and if we can empower girls and women and give them access to family planning, fertility rates in these countries will fall far faster than anticipated. And we can and still will declare victory eventually against hunger and severe poverty. And if we can, at the same time, keep fertility rates low here in the emerging and developed economies, we can reduce the stress on our shrinking environmental assets. Maybe even in the long term, we can, as our ancient ancestors did, live in harmony with nature. Now, there are some leading scientists who are concerned, including Stephen Hawking, who are concerned that we are on the path to extinction. The fear is that because of rising population growth and increasing consumption of resources, that this will lead to ecological ruin and to war and to conflict. But demographic trends are not destiny. And if we can complete sooner than expected the demographic transition that began 100 years ago, there is indeed still time and still hope for humanity. And we can look forward to a future of peace, prosperity, and most importantly, a sustainable world. Thank you very much.